Hello and welcome back to the Purpose Playbook. We are virtual again and really excited today to be joined by Oly Newton. Hi Ollie, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good.
Yeah, really grateful
So
to be here.
good. So we got in contact with Ollie a few weeks ago. He's got a big LinkedIn presence, and he was someone that we really wanted to interview. So we're really lucky that he's come on. Ollie, have you had a good Christmas?
Yeah, it's been really good, really nice. It feels like it's gone way too fast. I don't know about how it feels for you, but yeah, I'm sort of ready now to take on the new year. I feel like this period is difficult between Christmas and New Year for me. It's a really confusing period. I think like you don't know what to do. Like should you be working? Shouldn't you be working? Where is everyone? It's tough, but I'm ready
And you
for
don't know what
January.
day it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no idea what day it is.
I said it to my wife earlier. I was like, I don't know where we're at. Like, when do we go back to work? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
so listen, thanks for joining us, Ollie. What we're going to do, we're going to go right back to the start. We're going to go back to Ollie's younger years. You're going to tell me a bit about yourself, and then what we're going to do is go on along the journey, and you're going to talk us through what you're doing now and what the future looks like for you. So, taking it right back to the start, talk to me about Ollie's younger years.
Yeah, so growing up, I have to be really clear on this bit. I was really fortunate, really lucky. I grew up in very solid foundations, had an incredible family, mum, dad, brother, sister, and then wider family. We're all really close. And, for me, there was a lot of early warning signs from a very young age, probably 6 or 7. I remember being on holiday in Menorca, and we'd been out for a meal with my family this was the first time I knew I was a little bit different, was what I'd like to say. I was walking down a street, we'd been out for this meal, and I touched this lamppost with my right hand, carried on walking, and then after about maybe 100 meters, I had this overwhelming fear that if I didn't go back and touch the lamppost, that my whole family were going to die. So I ran back as fast as I could. My dad chased me. I touched this lamppost. Honestly, believed by completing that one that like that saved everyone's life. But little did I know back then that was going to be the start of something that was really going to materialize in something really difficult as the years went on. And these little things started to creep into my day to day life. I had no really real idea what was going on. It all linked back to something bad happening to somebody. I'd seen a film on monsters when I was 7, and I started to do these little checks in my bedroom. I had this fear of monsters in the cupboard, so I was doing these little checks in my wardrobe before I went to bed. 7 years old, and my dad, bless him, he was in the bedroom underneath, and I was in the attic, and he put this like laminate flooring in there, and he was like, he always jokes about it now, like the worst decision he ever made, because I was like a greyhound going around a track. That's what he used to say. I was like running around the room at 100 miles an hour doing these little checks. But the checks started off being pretty innocent. It was like one check, get into bed. But then probably within about the space of 3 or 4 months, I was doing maybe 30 checks, 40 checks, up to 50 checks. If I made a mistake, I'd have to start again. And obviously, I knew there wasn't monsters in my cupboard. It all sort of reverted back to that same thing with if you don't do these things, someone's going to die or something bad's going
Yeah,
to happen. And it was taking me some nights like an hour and a half just to get into bed. So it was frustrating to say the least. Like if I'm honest with you, but I sort of was able to cope. I was able to manage, and it didn't really show up during school. So it was more around that routine time, which is really common with what I was struggling with. I had no idea what I was struggling with back then, and I didn't really find out till later years. But yeah, I was very much sort of trapped and consumed in these little sort of rituals and routines. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to speak to. Like when my parents asked me, I didn't know what to say. So it was challenging, very challenging at that age.
and how? So you talk about your parents there. How did they find that? And did they? You talk about one moment there where you remember touching the lamppost. Have they told you about other things that happened before that? That kind of is associated with that or not?
Such a great question, and something. I had this conversation with my mum recently, and what's really strange about me, I think, and I don't know if this is common with a lot of kids, but I remember everything. Like I remember things happening before that I wouldn't have actually maybe necessarily linked to the same thing back then, but then when I
Mm.
look back, it really did link. Later in life, like there was a period of my life where my mum would drop me off at school, and she had to wait in her car parked down the road for around about half an hour every day because every so often, probably 2 or 3 times at the 5 a week, I would sit in class. I'd have that same fear that something was going to happen, and I'd run back to the car as fast as I could and make sure that she was still alive. And I didn't really put them two together back then, but that was another sort of sign. Something wasn't quite right. And I was chatting to my mum about this, and I remember it really clearly, and she does remember it, but she doesn't remember it as clearly as I do a lot of the things. I think she just thought, oh, maybe just a little bit of anxiety or whatever it could be. I never told her it was about her dying. I never told her it was about any of these things. But that will have been, that will have been sort of my first year in junior school. So that will have been when I was like around that, or maybe my last year in primary. So it was probably like, 6, just before that everything else happened. So around that same period when I started to notice it. But prior to that, no, not really. I think I was a busy kid. Like I was always, I was just. But I think one thing that was huge for me growing up, and I look back on my time, especially like going into secondary school as well. Like the teachers when I moved from junior school, I was chatting to someone about this earlier. Like that transition from junior school to secondary was a challenge for me, because I think like you sort of understood a little bit better in junior school, and you can get away with that sort of like a bit of a class clown, like a bit too much energy maybe. And what I didn't realise back then was I was undiagnosed ADHD, and I got a later diagnosis of that later in life, which made a lot of sense to me when I look back through, especially secondary school, because I just couldn't focus like the other kids. I couldn't learn like the other kids. I couldn't keep up, and then there'd be sometimes I was miles ahead, and it was a real challenge for me in secondary. And the teachers always used to say to my parents, they always used to be like, does he have ADHD? Have you looked into this? And then they were sort of correcting themselves, saying, oh, we don't think it is ADHD because he's not naughty. He's not a naughty kid. Back then they thought it was this behavioural problem, like almost like an issue. Like my cousin, bless him, who was adopted, struggled really bad, and he was a little bit more malicious with his acts, and probably a little bit more aggressive, and that they were the sort of kids that's sort of during that era when 90s who were getting that diagnosis, and I sort of just was maybe didn't quite hit that mark.
You talk about other people there. How did it sort of between primary and secondary school? How did it all impact friendships, relationships? Because obviously you haven't got an understanding. Then you said later on in life got diagnosed. How did it impact your relationships and friendships in school?
This is where I was that kid at school that everyone would gravitate to. I was that person that brought everyone together, but also because of the foundations I was brought up in through my mum and my dad. My mum was a school nurse. She was a nurse. My dad was a bank manager. But if you speak to probably the majority of kids in our year group at school, they'll say that my parents played a massive part in their childhood, because when we were growing up, I had huge friendship circles, big groups of friends. We used to our garden backed onto a tennis club, and there'd be on a weekend in secondary there'd probably be maybe 50, 60 kids on the tennis courts drinking and stuff when they get into 14 years old, that sort of age. And my mum and dad were I was the oldest out of my siblings, and my mum and dad were we're not having this, it's not right, we don't want kids down there, because they could see kids drinking on the roof and then rolling off and breaking their arms, and it was almost like they were watching, but they couldn't do anything about it. My parents had just built a conservatory on the back of the house, and it was over 2 floors. And they ended up, my dad was I've got an idea, I'm going to change the basement room into a games room. So he put a darts board in there, he put 2 arcade machines, his mate had a game business. And, we weren't rich. We're just very fortunate, I think. Look, it was but it was an incredible thing, because what happened was he ended up cutting down a bit of the fence down at the tennis court, and every Friday and Saturday we'd have 50, 60 kids in our garden, drinking safely. They were not sort of saying we don't want any drinking, but we're going to turn a blind eye to it because at times, because you're in a safe space, and we're not, we can keep an eye on you. And if anyone's been sick, my mum was going to have to look after them. And, so it became more respectful, because people weren't drinking as much, because they thought, actually, we're at someone's house here. And it was I feel they played a massive part in, there was 7, 8 guys sleeping in our, they wake up in the morning, there'd be like 7 people sleeping downstairs somewhere. Do you know what I mean? It was like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but like, it didn't actually impact my friendship groups, if I'm honest, going back to that question. I mean, that
No,
was a very
good.
ADHD response. It was a very round the world
Yeah,
response.
no, I love it. It's true. Do you know, it's what I'm hearing straight away is, I mean, we spoke previously from coming on, but what's really nice is like, you kind of had that stability from your parents,
Huge, yeah.
and everything. What I know from what you're doing now, and very much like me, my parents are incredible people,
Yeah.
and it's massively given me the foundations now to do what I want to do, because I want to be good people like them. And I can tell from speaking to you for 10 minutes, it's exactly the same as you as well.
Yeah, 100%, and that's one of the big things is I was so lucky growing up, and I think that's the reason why when things did go wrong, it's like after leaving school, like it was probably quite shocking for some people, and probably there was probably less of an understanding. I wasn't one of them kids who displayed any sort of problems. I certainly was a neurodivergent kid, not really fitting into a neurotypical school, but one thing that was really big about sort of my sort of time through school, as well as having like obviously my parents who were very supportive and they instilled these really high morals within me, so I wouldn't let any other kid get bullied. So it wasn't like I was not singling people out. If that kid was getting bullied, I was bringing them in. I was trying to sort of help them out and say, look, kids from the other end of town who didn't have money, I was sort of bringing them in, and I really cared about everybody rather than it just being about certain people. I had my close friends, but I wouldn't let things, I hated bullying, I hated anything like that. I think the teachers saw that in me, especially one teacher who was a bit of a driving force behind sort of a lot of the things I did in school, and really supported me through them sort of trickier periods when, a lot of kids were getting chucked out of class like myself. But what he was doing, Mr. Kent, he was called Paul Kent, and someone I'm really close to today. He came to my wedding, and he's a real, such a role model for me back in the days, and schools probably aren't really quite the same these days, and they can't have these sort of friendships as such, where he was like, if you'd see me out of lesson, rather than being like, why are you out of lesson, he'd be like, come with me, and we'd go to PE, and then I'd end up teaching like the year 7s PE, or I'd go to the dining room and he'd be like, get in there, Newton, you need to go in there and make some sausage sandwiches and help dinner ladies out if you're not going to go to class. So there was always like a sort of a different route for me, and I had that one person who was, he was my head of year. He was my head of year throughout school, and I was so fortunate to have him support me all the way. I think, I went back to my school with the work I'm doing now when we did a tour about a year ago, and the first thing he said to me was like, "You would not make it through school today. There's no chance."
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I'm the same. I mean, what's really interesting when I hear you talk, it's like, I mean, we're very different people, but I had that one guy who told me that I was good enough and would help me when others wouldn't. And he's the one I always remember. It's the ones you like, that sort of get you through, and they're you sort of want to instill that then in other people, right? So it's lovely that he's come to your wedding, and a lot of what you talk about is the importance in relationships, right? It's the importance of having those people around you who are teaching you the right way to do stuff, even when things are a little bit wrong. So let me go on to the bit you mentioned in there when things started going wrong. So let's go on to what that looked like, what wrong looked like, and sort of how you've dealt with it.
So I think maybe like looking back now, I can see a lot of the reasons why maybe things did go wrong, and I would, because I was someone who was very fortunate. I had access to tennis, I could play rugby, I could play football, I could play whatever I wanted to do. I was massive into football, played a bit of rugby at school, played basketball, anything I could get my hands on, roller hockey, whatever it was, I'd be out there doing it, because that was, for me, that was what I needed. And I almost think, like, looking back, maybe I was actually self-medicating through exercise as a child, because these things are always actually there, but maybe I was always giving myself a better chance because of the access I had. And that social mobility piece is huge, I think. A lot of these young people nowadays, they just don't have access to the things that I have access to. And that's the reason why, it can be quite a slippery slope. And they're probably not, there's a lot more things like social media these days, which we didn't have when I was younger. And kids are like able to sort of access more things and get caught up and trapped in, you know, TikTok and things like that. That I'm a sort of an advocate for social media in some respects because you know, it played a huge part in my recovery journey. But at the same time, I think it's not quite as safe as it was, you know, especially not the way I use it anyway. And I think it can be quite a dangerous place for a lot of young people, even though I do believe there's a positive side to it too, which we always talk about. But yeah, so my things started to, I guess, fall apart a little bit when I discovered drinking. I was drinking anyway, but I was still doing sport, and then leaving school, things sort of stopped around that period. You know, I was probably drinking more, wasn't really doing any of we'd left the football team, finished when we were 18, and just my coping mechanisms, which I obviously had built, which were there, which I had no idea I'd even built, obviously just disappeared really. But it didn't for me feel like there was a gradual decline. It felt like it was an immediate decline, and it all happened after a night out. I'd been on a night out with some friends when I was 21, and nothing happened on that night out that was anything to do with me. It was just to do with a conversation the following day that sent me on this spiral, which, you know, looking back, it doesn't even, it seems a little bit like illogical in some respects, but it was just one thing that a guy said who I'd been out with on the night, and we basically knew we were a sort of a big group of friends, sort of like maybe a mixture of friends. It wasn't any of my really close-knit friends. It was just like a mixture of different people. And one of the lads who we were with, we'd seen him cheat on his partner. And like sort of going back to that piece I was saying earlier about my morals, like they were off the chain. Like I hated things like that. I hated, why would you do that? Obviously we knew the girl, not well, but I knew the girl through the circles. And I was like, why would you do that? You know, why would you cheat? And I sort of questioned him the next day. And it was his response that sent me on this ridiculous spiral that, you know, looking back, like I couldn't have done anything about it. But I said to him, why did you do it? And he turned around to me and he said, I don't remember doing it, so it didn't happen. And for me, that was like, but I saw you do it. And he said, I don't remember. And for him, that was it. Drawing a line under it, it's done. But strangely for me, rather than me doubt sort of him and think badly of him, and it wasn't someone I cared an awful lot about. It was, you know, it was just a friend of a friend, really. But I started to doubt myself. I started to make myself, and I'd been in a relationship up until that stage for about a year. Someone from school who was a lovely girl, like you know, and a friend still to this day. And all of a sudden, my mind switched from me being annoyed with him to me thinking, Ollie, you've been on nights out. Imagine if you've cheated. Imagine if you've done something unlawful on these nights out. And honestly, within the space of a week, I was totally trapped, totally consumed by these thoughts of me replaying nights out. I'd go back over every night out that we'd been out on, where she hadn't been there, when, you know, could I have cheated with that person? My mind was saying, you need to ask that person if you've done something. And it started off being about cheating. And, you know, I didn't realize it, but I was anxious, and, you know, I was plummeting. And then it started to be about everything I was morally against. So everything that I despised and everything I hated, my mind was saying, you know, you could have done that. You could be that person. You could have, you know, it could be, I could watch the news and someone had been attacked down the road, and I'd be saying to myself, that could have been you. You were near there at that time. You know, imagine if that was you. And I'd almost like live the fear and guilt that was attached to it, as if I'd physically done these things that I knew I'd never do. And yeah, my life just went from me being that guy that brought everyone together to really not being able to leave the house. I mean, after that night out, I really didn't go to any pubs. I didn't go on any nights out. I sort of refused to socialise. I was in that relationship that I was trying to escape, because my mind was, you know, if I had done that, I didn't belong here. In my mind was like, you should be dead. You know, if you've done that, if any of these thoughts you're having are real, because the more I started to think about it, I was creating false memories, and it was getting worse and worse and worse and snowballing. And yeah, it was just a proper downhill spiral from there.
And when you talk, what really interests me is because you know, it's all about educating, right? And on this podcast, we want to educate people. So a lot of your stuff seems like, even going back to the lamppost, seems like intrusive thoughts, right? So it's coming in, you're thinking something. Do you then start believing that that's happening? So, like, and how have you coped with that because I would imagine that doesn't disappear, right? So there must be times now, obviously you're through that period of your life, which is brilliant, but there must be times now, how do you cope, for other people that might be dealing with this, how do you cope with it now better than you did then?
Well, I mean, that period of my life, I mean, it was a long period. From that night out, the way I would describe it is I almost lost 10 years of my life to mental illness from that stage. From the age of 21 to 31, I was trapped in this cycle, and it was about everything I was morally against. And I talk a lot about intrusive thoughts because, it's important to, and we all have them. Like, I've got, when I deliver my talks and I speak to young people, I speak about sort of like real common thoughts that people have, like maybe, adults specifically, like driving a car off the road. I think it's like 60% of males, 50% of females have it. And even like passengers pulling the steering wheel, and like, 50% of young people have that thought. Or it might be harming someone or hurting somebody. We have these thoughts, or doing something unlawful, or doing something with like a public figure, or, these things from a sexual perspective, whatever that may be. But one of the big ones I talk about is like, that a lot of people have is pushing someone. So pushing like either a stranger or someone in front of a train or in front of a car, right? I think the statistics around that were around about 20% of males have had it, maybe 15% of females have had it. And, the way I describe this so people understand it better is like, I've had that thought, but what happens for me is I live the fear and guilt that's attached to the thought as if I've physically actually done it. So I've been at a train station and I've had that thought, and I've left the train station, and my mind's all of a sudden latched onto it, and it's like, you could have done it. Imagine if you've done it. You need to go and check the CCTV. And then I'd spend 2 to 3 months sometimes thinking the police are looking for me. And it's so vivid and feels so real, even though I know it's not real, and I know I'd never do these things. It's the feelings that are attached to it, and they just totally consume me. And it was that bad for me, if I'm honest, Brian, that I was having to document my every move. So from leaving the house in the morning to getting home, I discovered the iPhone notes. And the iPhone notes were, for me at the time, I thought, this is great. This is a way of me being able to get a date and timestamp for everything that I'm doing, everything that I've done. But actually, it became a bit of a catalyst, and it was fueling the fire more than anything. And I was writing, like, I'd look at a girl in the eye, I'd write, you've looked at the girl in the eye, you were nowhere near her, you didn't cheat on your partner, you didn't do anything. And all these things I was having to write, note after note after note, and I'd get home with like 100 notes in my phone. So these intrusive thoughts, like, it's scary, but it's also it's good to understand that we do all have them, and most people will have the thought and they'll label it the thought, they'll know it's a thought, and they'll move on. For someone with like me who suffers with what I was suffering with at the time, and I didn't actually know what was wrong with me until I ran to a different country, moved to Gibraltar, took a job over there, ran away from the relationship. And it was lucky that one of the guys who had trained in Sheffield for a job that he'd moved up to a managerial role in the company we were working for. We were working in the betting industry. He'd seen me decline. And he like pulled me to one side and he said, I'm worried about you. I want to help. We need to help you. Like, what's going on? And at that stage, I was having, this was probably about 6 to 10 months into the whole journey. My mind was telling me to give up. It was telling me to, I was on the smoking roof 6 floors up, and it was saying, you need to leave, you need to jump. And, for me, it was like, what is going on? Why am I like this? And he sent his partner around, and she sat me down. She was a psychiatrist in the hospital, and she was like, sat me down for like 5 minutes, and she goes, I know exactly what's wrong with you. She says, you've got OCD. You've got obsessive compulsive disorder. And I just looked around at my room and I went, look at the state of my flat. Does it look like I've got OCD? And I would never have even thought that any of this linked to that. And then she was like, did you not have any traits when you grew up, like as a child? And I was like, yeah, actually, I was very much stuck in like these rituals and routines. But I never knew that OCD sort of showed up in this way of like intrusive thoughts, rumination, that side of things. And that was very much the unknown for me. And I think the key really is finding those better coping mechanisms to manage these thoughts, and whatever that may be. I talk about sort of the impact that stress can have on, it's the biggest cause for mental illness if it's not, if you don't look after yourself. And that little bit of stress that you're having, sometimes all it takes is when you don't feel like seeing your friends, going to see your friends, or when you don't feel like going to the gym, actually keeping on and going to the gym. Like for me, if I'd have maybe had sports still during those periods and I wasn't using drink to sort of maybe numb a lot of the pain, or to try and, because when I was over there, I was drinking on a night on my own some nights just to try and stop the thoughts. And then I'd wake up the next day, it was like a billion times worse. So if I'd have just been like, I'm going to go out on my bike, or I'm going to go to the gym, or maybe things would have been different. But it's so easy in them situations to choose the wrong coping mechanism.
Wrong thing, yeah. It's easier. It's about forgetting, isn't it? There's a couple of things from that I just want to ask. One, was it just alcohol, or was there more? Did it come through alcohol, drugs, gambling? What was sort of the lowest point?
So I never took any drugs, which is a miracle. And also, it's not really a miracle if you met my mum. Like, she was a school nurse, and that was one of the things that she always said, and I stuck to that. I might have tried a little bit of weed once or twice as a child, but it was never. It was literally once or twice because I hated it. I didn't like it, so that was about as far as it went. And I'm talking about like a little bit. I'm not talking about. I never got into any routines or I never had any trouble with any drugs or anything impacted me in that way. But drink was an interesting one. I think ADHD probably played a huge part in my behaviour when I was drinking, because I wasn't the sort of person that was drinking like the rest of the lads, where they're like on the pub and they're trying to find a girl. And I was like the most drunk in the corner. It was always excessive, and it was always, maybe I was really masking certain things, growing up, like I was using it as a way to mask that. And I think I was probably out more than most people, wasn't looking after myself. So there was no drugs, but when I ended up, I never bet at all until probably about 19 years old. And that's 1920 when I got a job working for William Hill. And I was working in the call centres, and then I ended up moving with them to Gibraltar to work with them. I was looking after like the priority clients. And then, if I'm honest, like, I wouldn't ever have said that. I mean, it probably sounds like I had a problem, but I didn't ever have like a problem where it was like, oh, I'm constantly losing money. I'm chasing. But there was periods where I was betting to try and get that little bit of that little hit of dopamine, or that little thrill that, and actually I always felt better when I lost the money and all the money I had anyway. That was the better feeling. Weirdly, I don't know. I think that's quite a common thing, but there was periods where, there'd be someone who rings up in my old job, and they'd have the horse was running, and they'd put like 50 grand on it to win, and I'd be like, okay, that's definitely going to win. So I'd run to the bookies, and I think the most I put on a horse was maybe about £500, which again is excessive for me when I'm used to betting like tens, fives, 20. But for me, like, that, for them, 50 grand might be like nothing. Do you know what I mean? 50 grand to them might be like what the equivalent of what 10 quid is for me. And I'm thinking, so it's like it was a bit of a bad cycle to be stuck in over there. And I didn't have an awful lot of people over there. I found myself, after leaving the other relationship, getting into another relationship, which didn't help. And there was quite a lot of misunderstanding in that second relationship. There was a lot of cultural differences, the relationship I had over there. And it was difficult, so I couldn't really speak about how I was feeling, so I was really struggling even more, and I was trying to mask it. And people sometimes might have seen me thinking, he's all right, but actually deep down I didn't really want to. That's probably the fact of it, really.
And we'll come back to masking in a minute. The one thing I wanted to ask you, a lot of the stuff you talk about resonates with me massively. How did you deal, if you're anything like me, when you do something wrong, there's a big guilt. Like you hate being wrong, you hate doing something wrong, you hate upsetting people. How did you deal with feeling like you've let your parents down? So you, to me, you sound like you had a lot of emotional intelligence growing up around you. People taught you right from wrong. You had really good morals. So when you started letting people down or feeling that way, how did you cope with the guilt of upsetting your parents?
Yeah, I think I never really. It's a strange one because I never did anything like necessarily to upset them in any way, if I'm honest, because I was always, everything. I always wanted to be the best I could for them. I think the biggest mistake I made in the whole, my whole journey was thinking that when I started to fall, because I was falling really fast, and I could see that they could see the differences in me, and I could see that they could see I wasn't going out anymore, and I wasn't really enjoying like social time and being around people. And I broke down to my mum once or twice, but I couldn't explain what was going on. I just said, look, I think I'm a bad person. I think I've done something wrong, but I know I haven't. And she's like, what do you mean? She didn't get it. I think the biggest mistake I made was taking that job in Spain, thinking actually, if I get away from everybody, if I move away from my family and my parents, then it's going to be better. When actually I needed them more than anything at that moment in time. It's the same with my friends. I mean, like I said, I had huge friendship circles. I probably had 4 or 5 friendship circles of 20 different guys, and girls, and it'd be like maybe 100 friends who were actually around me within that, often. And I went from that to then deleting those close friends off social media, Facebook, because I couldn't bear to see them enjoying life when I wasn't. And Facebook to me was an awful time, really, like when it first came out and everyone started getting on that. And I'd been on it about a year or two, and I was having to delete people. And then my close friends were messaging me like, why have you deleted so-and-so off Facebook? Like, what's she done? Like, and I'm like, I haven't. I might have done it by accident. I don't mean to. And then I deleted people out my phone book. I wouldn't talk to people. There's only a couple of friends that really I sort of allowed into my life, if I'm honest. And that's there's probably 2 or 3 that I tried to push away, but they stuck around.
Still there.
So, yeah.
Well, listen, mate, thanks for sharing all of that. I mean, it's tough to go back sometimes and talk about it. And I know you obviously do it speaking. You speak a lot about yourself. But let's move on to now. Let's move on to when things changed at sort of 31. What's changed, what you're doing now, and what's coming up in future for you. So 31 comes. You've had 10 years of life that you just you've left behind. What changed? What was the moment where you said, well, I need to change this?
So the turning point for me came around that period when I was about 30, around 31 years old. About 29 years old, I'd started a new job at working back in the UK, so I had moved back. So I had to. They were saying my workplace advised that I moved back because of it become really clear about how badly I was struggling. And that's when I had to tell my family and parents. And obviously at that stage, this was probably 5-6 years before that. I was, it was a very strange period having to like tell them. And I knew what was wrong with me. I had OCD, but then there was still like a long 5-year period of me trying to understand what that really was and what that really meant. And I was still quite, stuck. But around 29, I met my partner. I'd started a new job at Skybet, and this was about 8 years into that real dark period. And I met her there, and I was like, look, you don't want anything to do with me. I said to her, I'm absolutely nuts. I think I said, I wouldn't use that term now, obviously, in the space I work in, but I was like, keep clear. You do not want anything to do with me. But she saw something in me when I didn't see anything in myself. Like I generally didn't feel like I had anything to give in this world. I felt like I didn't belong here anymore, if I'm honest. But she did see something in me. And she'd come out of a long-term relationship. She had 3 kids. So she had a little 2-year-old boy, a 4-year-old boy, and a 7-year-old boy at that time. And I was like, this isn't probably going to work. Am I capable of doing this? But then, you know what? That was I call it my lifeline, really, if I'm honest. It was, she was someone who came into my life that I opened up to before it even, by saying those things straight away, by saying to her, like, look, you don't want anything to do with me, stay clear, and so on. I feel like I sort of created those conversations early on. So she knew what I was about, and it gave me, that was probably one of the first time I really did open up to somebody about, how I was really feeling. And then the kids, taking on the kids, they are a huge lifeline to me. They've been like, they gave me a totally different outlook on life. I always say that when you're struggling and you don't want to leave the house and then one of the kids just swings past you on one of the light fittings that feels like everything's all right all of a sudden. Do you know what I mean? And they gave me purpose, and they allowed me to view the world in a different way, and they gave me a reason, which I didn't feel like I had, and she did as well. And that first couple of years was difficult because of the thoughts that whenever I'm in a relationship, the thoughts are stronger. But it was difficult, challenging for her, because I was having to say to her, look, like, I'm having this thought that you are not you, and I can't kiss you because my mind's telling me you are someone else. And there was periods of like 2 or 3 months where I couldn't give her any affection, and she still stood by me, and I'm so grateful for her. She was like, my guardian angel, really. It makes me quite amazing. But she got me through a really difficult period, and she persevered, and I persevered because of I had to, because I believed in her, and it took a lot for me to stay in that relationship purely because of the thoughts. I could have run away, and there was periods I nearly did. But I'm so glad I stuck with it, because like together now we are like an absolute force. But 31 years old, I was in that job. Things got harder because of the relationship, the thoughts of the relationship. And I remember one of my managers coming up behind me, and I was sort of really struggling then. I was shying away in the corner, staying away. I wasn't really getting involved. Never went on nights out or anything like that. And it was a big company. It was Sky Betting and Gaming I was working for. And my manager came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he went, "Ollie." And I went, "Yeah." He went, "We need to chat." And I was like, he said, and he took me to the room and he said, "I'm really worried about you." And he was probably the first person in the workspace that I really spoke to. And I turned to him and I said, "I'm really worried about myself." He says, "I've been stuck like this for 10 years. I don't know what to do." And he's like, "Stuck like what?" And I was like, "I cannot see the screen. I can't see what I'm meant to be doing. All I see is these like thoughts going straight. It's almost like someone's playing an old, like voice recorder, like, and they're replaying it and playing it again, like an old videotape or something. And it's screeching, and it's like, it's painful. And my mind's telling me I'm this bad person, I've done these bad things." And he was like, "We want to help you." And he turned around to me and said, "Look, you can take up to 3 months off and we'll pay you." And I was like, "Really?" He was like, "Yeah." He said, "We want you to get better. We're going to get you some therapy. We're going to get you some support, but you need to take the time off." And I was frightened of that, because I was quite a structured, routine person. I thought that work was actually helping me, but actually, what I know now is like the impact that presenteeism is something we talk about a lot about, like being present at work when you should actually be off work, and the impact that was having on me. And deep down, I didn't know anything about that. I was embarrassed by what was going on. I felt like I needed to, I still had that sort of that man up, you need to carry on stuff, which I know now is not the case. And he ended up saying, "Take the time off." And I went to the doctor. My doctor signed me off. I woke up that next morning, and I think that's definitely when things really changed for me. I'd woke up pretty normal. Like, for me, I'd wake up at like probably 7 in the morning, but I wouldn't open my eyes till 11, because I'd be so scared of like facing the day. And that day wasn't too dissimilar, but it was boiling hot outside, and I just had to do something. I'd been stuck for way too long, and I had a bit of a different feeling of hope. And we talk a lot about hope. I was always hopeful. I believed one day I'd get better, but I feel like you have to take some form of action. If you don't, then you can just be stuck forever. And I took action that day. I went into my cupboard, pulled out some old gym kits, some old trainers, and I left the house. Started to walk a little bit, and then I started to run. I was never a runner. I didn't like running like most people. And then probably after about 40 minutes, I'd ran and walked 5 kilometers. And when I stopped, everything stopped for the first time in like 10 years. Everything stopped. And it didn't last long. It lasted like 5 minutes. But I absolutely lived for that feeling. Like, ever since that day, I've ran every single day for 7 years straight now. Literally every day I open my eyes, I'm straight out the door and I'm running. And running, it's all about creating that, through creating those moments of freedom from the thoughts, that those moments of respite. Some days I needed to run 30k, some days I needed to run 10k, some days I needed to run 50k. Depending on how I was feeling, I was managing it through that, and it was a little bit unhealthy, but it was healthier than what it was before. I was creating these moments to think clearly, and I could think about the future for the first time. And I just absolutely lived for that feeling. The rest, I guess, is history, really. It's been an incredible journey from that moment to where I guess I am today.
I love it. There's a couple of bits there that I said I'd come back to the masking, right? What's really interesting is the person you opened up to and stopped masking and told the truth is the person that sort of brought you out of it. So it's like the importance of communication and sort of talking to people is there, and when it's someone you trust, they can help you through it. Also, just want to go to the ridiculous statistics of your running. Like, I hate running. I always think I should do it. And this conversation might make me wake up in the morning and go and do it. But talk to me about your statistics. 24,000 kilometers in 7 years.
Yeah, so I last sort of did all the checks on like exactly what it meant in the grand scheme of things, and the last time I checked was about a year ago, and I'd averaged 10 kilometers a day for 7 years.
Mad.
Yeah, and it's not like I run 10k every day. It might be, I might run 8k in the morning, and then I might run like a half marathon on the weekend. So it all like totaled up.
Yeah.
I think it'll have reduced a bit now because over the last year, things have really changed. Last year and a half, 2 years, things have changed a lot. I run every day, but some days, my averages are probably reducing a little bit. But yeah, I've ran 24,000 kilometers over that 7 year period, and honestly, the difference it's made to my life, I think it's important on this to touch on the fact that actually it wasn't. I don't think it was necessarily. I do think it was one of the driving forces behind it, but even for that first 3 years, so after about a month of running, I set up a mental health support page called Run for Your Mind. I said to my partner, I said, look, I need to share the message of like the difference this is making to my life, because there's got to be loads of other people stuck out there. And I set up Run for Your Mind, had no real direction. I just started to blog about how I was feeling, like the difference it was making me feel. Been really open and honest about the fact that I was still really struggling, because actually when I was running, like it was still difficult, it was still challenging. The thoughts, they were still there. It was when I stopped that things stopped temporarily. And I started to talk about it, and I set up an Instagram page. I started just doing these little videos of like, I had this little drone that used to follow me and do, I didn't show my face at first, and then I started to show my face and built a community. And we've got 4,000 odd runners now in the Strava club that I haven't really been doing much on recently because of my own trying to keep on top of a lot of the things I'm going through myself, which is fine. It's okay. I understand that I've got to do that anyway. But yeah, we've got a big community of people, a lot of people that support the mission. It's now like a CIC, like a community interest company. We offer sort of talks and stuff and training and support on the back of that. And, the running for me was like that first 3 years, it was like, it was just creating those moments of like freedom from the force. And, it was still challenging. I still didn't feel very good, if I'm honest with you, most of the time. I still was really socially anxious. I still couldn't go out as much and see people and do the things I enjoyed like I wanted to. And I think the real turning point for me was actually probably 3 years into that journey when I read a quote in a book, and it said, learn to become comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And I felt like that was exactly what I wasn't doing. Like I was running, I was helping myself, but I still wasn't putting myself in them uncomfortable positions. And I read that and I went downstairs. I remember saying to my partner, I said, look, like, what do I need to do? What is the thing that is, she was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, like, I think if I can do the most difficult thing, like the thing that I find the hardest, then maybe all the little things in between might start to fall back into place. So we sort of went through my time in education, in corporate, and everything sort of boiled down to this one thing that I couldn't do, that one thing that I found the most difficult, and it was speaking in front of people. Yeah. So I said to her, look, if I can share a bit about what I'm doing, the journey, Run for Your Mind, where I am, maybe then that, things might get easier. And about 6 months later, I got this an email from work saying, oh, we're doing this thing called the Untold Stories of the Business, and we've heard what you're doing with Run for Your Mind. And these guys were unbelievable. They literally accommodated, like when I moved back and when I came back off long-term sick, they effectively put like these running breaks in the middle of my shift, like, and things like that to help me. They were really supportive. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I thought I'm not gonna like this. It's gonna be so much anxiety. But I sat there on that stage, and there was like 250, 300 people, shared a bit about the journey, and then two of the managers pulled me to one side afterwards, and they basically said, you need to leave. And I was like, why? They were like, you should be doing this. This is what you should be doing, and we're going to help you get there. And they put me on a course to become better at speaking, and then which was more TED stuff. From there it was like I think COVID hit and it was difficult, and I was like, the dream's over. And then coming out the other side of COVID, I feel like maybe I was probably the most relative person to speak about the struggles that everyone was facing anyway. Everyone in terms of people were struggling at home. There was, back end of it, I had the opportunity to do some online stuff. So I'd done some stuff around the business there, some more talks. And then my first talks coming out the other side were, it was honestly, I don't like doing it because I don't like sort of I don't want it to come across like I'm showing off, because I'm not. It's more like, what on earth is going on? But I left there. The last talk I did at work, and then from there it was I didn't leave work. I stayed on part time. But my first few talks were my first talk was for Microsoft Ireland. My second talk was for Burberry, and then from there it was GlaxoSmithKline, Direct Line, Virgin Media, and it was just this ridiculous. It was just
surreal, right?
Yeah, and what is what's happening, and I've been on the last couple of years an incredible journey where I created a really nice business model which is very different to what anyone else is doing, which I thought was really I think people really sort of loved the concept I'd created, which was every time I delivered a talk in a corporate and they paid for me to deliver a talk, I'd deliver a free talk in a school on behalf of them, so it was incorporated in the cost. So there was that giving back element of it, and it was really nice. Whereas doing stuff for say the NHS, I've been doing some keynote stuff at their conferences and speaking in front of 350 nurses, and then the next month I can be in a school saying I'm doing this on behalf of the NHS. They've paid for it to have it. Bring some of the directors along and be look at the impact you're having, not just in that room with that 350 people, you're having the impact on 350 kids at a school as well, which was a big thing for me. And it's taken me on a mad journey. I've been working in Canada. I've got a football shirt behind me. I worked with the Canadian Premier League. They presented me with a footy shirt before, did a talk, and got a little, even I was on the pitch before one of the matches. It's just been, I've been doing some stuff with Tennis Canada. So I was working across Vancouver, Calgary, Whistler. It's honestly, it's absolutely beyond me.
Mate, it's mad and it's inspirational, right? So from the fact of not being able to leave your house to do it, it's a massive inspiration to everybody who feels like that. And coming out of COVID, so many people felt like that. The amount of stuff I work with around the SEMH stuff, and the amount of people that are struggling, what you're doing is a massive credit, mate. And the way you're putting it back on the companies that you go and work with is lovely. It's a lovely initiative for them companies. But to give the schools and the kids free talks as well is mad. So what's next for you? So what's coming up 2025? What does that look like for Oly?
Yeah, so we had a really big year. We did a project called 100 Talks for Change, which was a concept that I met another guy called Daniel Wilshire, who's we just set up a business together to launch this project, 100 Talks for Change, where we came up with the idea of delivering 100 free mental health talks in 20 days across 63 schools in the United Kingdom to hopefully impact 10,000 kids. And yeah, we ran that project the back end a year ago. So we ran that project last year, and it was the best thing I've ever done. We pitched the idea to some huge companies like Hayes, who came on board as a corporate partner, ISG, a big construction company, some companies in Sheffield like Gravitate, a few other smaller companies. And, we were able to get some money from them from a social value perspective, which allowed us to create huge change. I mean, we filmed this documentary about the journey, which I can give you a link to if anyone wants to watch it. We ended up speaking to close to 25,000 kids. We were having hundreds of messages every single day, across not every day hundreds, but across the whole thing, we had hundreds of messages from kids, parents, ringing us, emails. But it was just the most, amazing journey. And we're sort of looking now to sort of bring that concept into more of a business. So rather than just running the individual projects, we're going to be leaning on a lot of social value stuff. We've got some great partnerships with quite a large a very large construction company who have to, a lot of their projects involve making sure that a certain amount of money goes back into the community, and we can support them with that by running large scale projects across different cities. We're working closely with schools. On the back of the project we we collated data and information about what the kids were struggling with, and then we built a program on the back of it, which is called the LifeX program, which is life experience program effectively, and it focuses on these 4 key takeaways from the feedback, which were stress, stigma, social media, and self-belief. And we deliver that program over either one full day with one cohort, or a lot of the time we've been delivering it across Coventry and Leicestershire. We've been doing 1 day a week for 5 weeks, and we'd have 12 groups altogether. So we'd be 3 days of work, 4 hours a day, and then we'd see the group once a week, each individual group once a week. And it's just, it's been amazing being able to work closer with these younger kids who are maybe going through difficulties, whether it be struggling in because they might have been in the system, and they're getting passed around through carers, and they've not had any solid role models, and instilling a bit of hope in them. And we were in a school last week, and this one kid, bless him, he'd been through the care system. He'd been handed over, him and his little brother, when he was 6 years old. And it makes me quite emotional to talk about this too, because it's he didn't have any, he really cared for the people that had taken him on, because he'd been through a series of other carers before that. And he the last part of the project, we had the teachers in there looking, and he stood up and read this letter out about, a letter to his younger self about what he sees himself doing, and it was all about buying his family a house, his foster house,
all giving back.
Yeah, and it was and no one saw that side of him. They said we've never even heard him talk about the care side of it before, and it's this is the sort of thing we can do. So we've built a team of speakers that have got experience in different areas, and they're not necessarily all about mental health. We've got musicians coming on board, we've got athletes coming on board, and what it is we want to be able to sort of run these high scale, high engagement projects across corporate and into schools on the back of that as well. So working with companies to support both their staff, but also give back to the community, which can then in turn bring, I guess, people, from, build relationships with schools. So then they're able to feed kids into them through work experience, and having that long-term relationships with the younger generation, and getting a better understanding. I think it's massive. So we've got loads of stuff going on. It's a bit of a wild time. We're just about to launch in January. But the concept is very much what we've always been doing, but bringing more people in to help us.
I love it, mate. I love it. Listen, first of all, thanks for coming on. Really, really appreciate your time. It's been over Christmas and New Year. What an incredible story. I mean, I've read up a lot about you before I met you, but meeting you is brilliant. And one of the things I've sort of taken away listening is the importance of everybody you've had around you, and then relationships you've had, your parents, your teacher, your missus and the children, your business partners, everybody, the people at William Hill who took you aside and sort of said, and it's really amazing that you're now sort of taking all of that brilliance, giving it back to other people, and you're going to have an amazing 2025, and hopefully you can come down and see what we do, and we'll come up and see what you do, and we'll sort of get together and help each other out on that. I'd like
to leave you on one thing on this, because I think it's important to touch on that, and everything that you've said there, summing it all up, is exactly how what means so much to me, what I care so much about. Because the big thing for me is I have gone from not being able to leave the house to delivering these talks all over, but ultimately that matters, but it doesn't matter as much as what really matters. And what really matters to me, and the biggest thing for me, and I talk about this in all my talks, all these great companies aside, all this great opportunities you get, it doesn't come close to being able to go out for a pint with my dad for the first time in 10 years. And, I bring a picture of that up on the screen and like, this is what really matters. Like, this is what it's really done for me. Because what all this stuff's done for me and finding my voice, finding the strength to get out running every day and use that as a coping mechanism. And I have the cold showers every morning, doing all these little things are what, have allowed me to have that thing that most people really take for granted, like being out with your friends, seeing people, doing the things you enjoy, which I couldn't do for so long. And that's what I can do now. And that's really what really matters the most. And that was always the ultimate goal when I said, learning to become comfortable, feeling comfortable. It wasn't necessarily about doing that. It was about making sure that I could do and live a normal life again, whatever normal looks like, And that's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah, and what's really evident, mate, is that what you've sort of found is you talk about the dopamine fix and stuff like that, moving on, and what you've done is got lots of different ways now of dealing with that, going to help, going to give back, having your missus there who stuck by you and you've stuck by her, and it's all those things that give you that coping mechanism for everything you've been through is really lovely now that you're giving that to other people. And there's so many people that we've worked with and you'd have worked with that you'll help so many people just by talking about your story. Listen, thanks so much for coming on. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.